The New York Mets are going to look a lot different next season, but there is still so much that has to be done if they're actually going to be better.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. On the show today, we're going to talk about where the Mets roster stands as we're heading into the new year. In the first segment, I want to talk about this starting lineup. A lot has changed with no more Brandon Nimmo, Jeff McNeil, or Pete Alonso. How do they replace all that production? How far are they away from replacing all that production? In the second segment, we're going to talk about the pitching. Then in the final segment, we're going to put it all together and try to lay out what has to be done for this team to be ready for spring training. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. This is the #1 daily podcast on the New York Mets. If you want to find any of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. All right, so first and foremost, I hope you all had a very happy holiday break and are still enjoying a nice holiday break. I decided to take a couple days off for Christmas to just enjoy time with my family. Right now, I snuck away. I'm in a cold garage here outside of Chicago in my sister's car doing this episode of Locked On Mets. And I am planning to do one more tomorrow, which will be your Sunday show. And then I will be taking another day break. Got a busy Sunday night planned. And then I'll be back regularly scheduled programming Tuesday through probably Saturday next week. And you'll start to get some videos probably on New Year's Day. I'll be coming home New Year's Eve. So I wanted to lay that out for all the Locked On Mets everydayers who have maybe been wondering where I've been at the last couple days. And I wanted to again wish you all a very happy holiday season. But let's get down to business. This team is so different. And I want to do this show today as sort of just a State of the Union, a check-in on where this team is at, what has been accomplished or torn down, or where are we at? Because I think when we went into the offseason, there was a couple things that seemed paramount. Re-sign or replace Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz. Get starting pitching. That was sort of what we were all thinking about, right? This team needed an ace, and they needed to bring those major free agents back. Well, they didn't bring back either. And when it comes to their lineup, they also traded two guys that have been part of this team for Nimmo since 2016. He's been a consistent presence in that lineup. And for Jeff McNeil since the second half of 2018. So the two longest tenured Mets going into the offseason were both traded. And now we look at this team and where they would have been had they kept those guys, including Alonso, where they're at. I don't think this is a better team at all. So let's run through the lineup. Let's say the Mets just keep everybody and re-sign Pete Alonso. You got Brandon Nimmo, Carson Benge, Juan Soto as your starting outfield, Tyrone Taylor as your fourth outfielder. You looking around the diamonds, you got Brett Beatty at third, Lindor at short, Jeff McNeil at second, Pete Alonso at first, Mark Vientos at DH, Luis Angel Acuna and Ronnie Mauricio filling out the bench a bit, along with, again, Tyrone Taylor and Luis Torrens. Francisco Alvarez is your starting catcher. Now, run prevention-wise, defense. Sure, maybe it's a little bit weak, particularly in the corner outfield spots. And Carson Benge, while I do think he can play a big league center field, is he going to be elite defensively out there? Probably not. And when you have two guys in the corners who aren't great defensively, I can understand why that outfield might not have been up to snuff for the Mets. But look at the infield defense. Jeff McNeil's not a bad defender at second. He's a lot better hitter than Marcus Semien, or at least he has been the last couple of years. Now, Semien has more power, but Jeff McNeil is a more complete offensive player. Beatty Lindor, that's the same. You've gone from Pete Alonso to Jorge Polanco. So now as we look at where the Mets are at, this team defensively, sure, they're a little bit better. Marcus Semien is a upgrade over Jeff McNeil. He won a Gold Glove last year. Athletically, he's definitely better. I'm sure him and Lindor are going to be much better at turning double plays at the middle, something that Jeff McNeil and Lindor weren't very good at. So I understand the defensive improvements there. But let's run through this lineup and see what it looks like. I guess Jorge Polanco's the first baseman, until proven otherwise. Second base, Semien, cool. You got Lindor and Beatty, that's the same thing as it would have been. The outfield, though, what's the outfield right now? Juan Soto, Carson Benge, and Tyrone Taylor with no bench outfielders unless you want to consider Ji-Hwan Bae or Nick Morabito part of your outfield because they're on the 40. But I don't want either of those guys taking meaningful at-bats in April. So where are you with that outfield? That right now, all of a sudden, something that we weren't even really thinking about going into the offseason. Because we thought, all right, you got Nimmo, you got Soto, Ben should be ready very soon. You could have said they didn't need to do anything in the outfield, and you had Jeff McNeil to go out there and to, be that stopgap bridge if you needed to a Carson Benge. To be a guy that could push Nimmo and Soto to DH a little bit more because you had McNeil as an option. Even after you traded Nimmo, Jeff McNeil, I still don't know if the Mets are going to end up with a better left fielder than Jeff McNeil. If they decide to sign Austin Hayes, or they try to form some type of platoon in the outfield where Austin Hayes is your lefty masher, and I don't even know, you get some type of you get like Max Kepler and Austin Hayes. It's all right, that's our outfield. For one, I don't even know how much better that is defensively than what you had with Nimmo. And two, offensively, it's definitely a lot worse than Brandon Nimmo and probably even worse than Jeff McNeil. So the funny thing about where the Mets are at right now, sure, in some respects, their infield got a little bit better run prevention-wise. But this team has gotten a lot worse than they've gotten better offensively. And while I still, in a vacuum, like Jorge Polanco as a player, I think he's a good bat. He's coming off a really good season. He was working at first base last year. I actually feel pretty confident that he's going to be able to hold down first base, and it's not going to be a massive issue where the guy looks completely lost out there. I think he'll probably be fine. And even though I've defended Pete Alonso his entire career defensively, you're not jumping over the highest of bars. Will the Mets have the same type of a receiver at first base? No. Pete Alonso is really good around the bag. He has good footwork. He's great at picking the ball. We all know that. He's a big guy, gives those infielders a big target. Jorge Polanco is, 5'11", 6 foot, so you got a smaller target. I do think as a former shortstop, he'll have the hands to be pretty good at picking the balls out of the ground. I don't think that's going to be the biggest challenge for him, but still the footwork side of things could be a work in progress. He's going to be much better at throwing to bases, so that's going to be one improvement. Whether it's Jorge Polanco, Mark Vientos, grab somebody off the street. It's going to be hard to find someone who's not going to throw to first base with a moving target better than Pete Alonso, especially with what he did last season. But Jorge Polanco's not Pete Alonso offensively. And so you look at where this team is at right now, I think we went into the offseason and said, all right, this team needs to add pitching. That was the reason why they didn't make the playoffs. And they've taken a wrecking ball to this core. And I understand why that core maybe got stale. They think it's time to, start over and try to create a new era of Mets baseball. And I get that. I understand the notion that a team has a certain window. And if it doesn't happen, you can't just keep running it back. But you have gotten yourself in a position now, especially with the Jeff McNeil trade, where a lot of work has to be done to round out this roster. Now, you sign Cody Bellinger tomorrow? Okay. Now we can talk. Now you look at the outfield, you say, all right, Cody Bellinger, Carson Benge, Juan Soto with a Tyrone Taylor fourth outfield option. That's not a bad outfield. Bellinger, if things break great during the season and Jet Williams and Carson Benge are both ready to start in the outfield, or hey, if you want to even call Nick Morabito, AJ Ewing, Ryan Clifford, there's a lot of young guys the Mets have that could end up in the outfield, and Bellinger can slide over to first base if things are working out with Mark Vientos or whatever you decide, all right, fine. It could be a different team that's not any worse and could even be better because the run prevention would be a lot better if Cody Bellinger is starting in a corner outfield spot and you got Marcus Semien at second base. And yes, it's Polanco compared to Alonso, but you didn't want long-term money tied in Alonso for whatever reason. I can start to get my head around it. But again, if you go out and you get Austin Hayes and Max Kepler and say, all right, that's our team, I'm going to be pretty frustrated with where the Mets are at. So to me right now, all of a sudden, that outfield spot, whether it's a center fielder that pushes Benge into a corner or a corner outfielder and Benge is your center fielder, that's the top priority this offseason, and it wasn't going to be that way. I didn't hate the Brandon Nimmo trade in a vacuum, but I sort of hate that the Mets traded Nimmo and then were quick to get rid of Jeff McNeil because they decided to change this core round. Now, you go out and you make the next couple moves that make me feel better about the outfield, fine. It just better not be Austin Hayes and Max Kepler. It better not be a platoon. Seriously, that's actually the best thing. It shouldn't be a platoon. If Austin Hayes is your 4/5 outfielder that's going to cycle through DH in the outfield because he's a good lefty masher, fine, because you already got Bellinger. I'm cool with that. But you cannot sell me a platoon in left field with Tyrone Taylor and Carson Benge in center. You can't sell it to me. You need to get a starter, and there are not many starting outfielders left on the market. So to me, top priority right now is figuring out the outfield. But what's the state of the pitching? We're going to go through that here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place live bets as the action unfolds, every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. Let's say a receiver gets hot, maybe a running back, the defense starts to tighten up, the momentum could flip after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into that moment. With live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly, player props that update as guys heat up, and you can also bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. If you're listening on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 16,000 subscribers. Now let's start off when we look at the pitching staff with the bullpen, because that's where there was a big loss. Edwin Diaz signs with the Dodgers. You also technically lost Tyler Rogers and Ryan Helsley and Gregory Soto, although outside of Rogers, that's maybe more addition by subtraction. And I just don't look at the rental relievers that you pick up and say, okay, you got to replace that. You can always replace rental relievers at the deadline, but doing that again if you need them, I think instead we have to look at where the bullpen was on opening day last year and compare it to where we're at right now. Last year, the opening day bullpen, Edwin Diaz, AJ Minter, Ryan Stanek, Jose Budo, Reed Garrett, Danny Young, Max Kranick, and Huascar Brazaban. Currently the bullpen, Devin Williams instead of Edwin Diaz, Luke Weaver instead of Ryan Stanek. You still have Minter. You have a healthy Brooks Raley. There's no more Budo. Reed Garrett and Danny Young and Max Kranick all got Tommy John surgery, as did Daniel Nunez. They retained all of those guys except for Kranick, I believe. I can't remember if they retained Danny Young. I think they did. Doesn't really matter, though, as far as the season's concerned. And Brazaban's still there. So, really, if you look at this bullpen, where they're at right now, with Devin Williams, Luke Weaver, AJ Minter, who might not be ready for opening day, but should be ready pretty early into the season, which is actually exactly where he was at last year, too, even after signing with the Mets, and you got a healthy Raley, I'd almost make an argument if you're just telling me the top four in the bullpen, and it's Devin Williams and Luke Weaver. Minter's the same either way. So, really, it's who do you like more, Devin Williams, Luke Weaver, and Brooks Raley, or Edwin Diaz, Ryan Stanek, and Reed Garrett? And I'll tell you what, I like the current bullpen more than the past one. I know Edwin Diaz had an amazing season. But if we really look back at Edwin Diaz's career with the Mets, he had 2 elite seasons. He had the 2022 season and he had the 2025 season, which just happened to be his 2 contract years. The years in between, he was good, but he wasn't great. He wasn't great in 2024, although he was pivotal in the playoffs. He wasn't great in 2021. He was great in 2020, but you don't even count that. And he was awful in 2019. I honestly think that Devin Williams is not as big of a step back as everyone is making it seem to be compared to Edwin Diaz. I really don't think so. And Luke Weaver compared to Ryan Stanek is a massive upgrade. And I would take Devin Williams and Luke Weaver over Edwin Diaz, especially when you think about the contract difference, where you have with Devin Williams making, yes, it's $51 million, but the deferrals made that more a 3-year, $45 million commitment. I actually think the present day value was slightly below that. So if you're talking about AAV of $15 million compared to Edwin Diaz, where it's over $20 million, I still have said and stand by the fact that I like the Devin Williams contract more than the Edwin Diaz contract. And the funny thing about this offseason, from where I'm sitting, had the Mets just brought back Pete Alonso instead of signing Jorge Polanco and done everything the same, I don't think that the brushback is anywhere near as bad. No one was really complaining too much when Nimmo got traded. Now, some people were sad, certainly, but everyone was able to justify the difference in contracts when it came to length between Nimmo and Semien. I think people started to get their head around Marcus Semien as an interesting bounce-back candidate for the Mets. Now, once you got to the point where Alonso and Diaz left, well, then the Nimmo thing felt worse. Same thing with the Jeff McNeil trade. When you compound it with everything that happened, especially the Nimmo-Semien trade and where the Mets are currently at with their outfield and just their depth overall, the McNeil trade just feels like the Mets were getting rid of a clubhouse problem, and I don't think any of these guys were specific clubhouse problems. I think it was this team has gotten stale. Steve Cohen has invested in this core for the past 5 years, and it's built around this core, and it hasn't worked. And it's not the type of core that David Stearns would have built if he had gotten to the Mets at the same time as Cohen after the 2020 season. Things would have been drastically different. And so the Mets turned the page, and I get it. They just have to replace a lot offensively. But if you look, component by component on this roster and you look at the bullpen, if you remove all the fan sentiment that's attached to Edwin Diaz and just look at where this bullpen's at now compared to where it was at a year ago, it's in better shape. And if they go out and they make a Ryan Stanek level signing when it comes to the money commitment, which was, I think, around, $6 million, something like that, they could find a reliever left on this market for $5-6 million that'll make this bullpen look even better. Whether it's an upside play like a Michael Kopech, whether you get a guy that's just always good, and Danny, I cannot pronounce your last name, Colome, or however you pronounce his left name, the lefty that just always has a low 2s ERA the past 3 or 4 years. Whether you get Tyler Rogers' brother Taylor who throws from the left side, whether you go out and get who's still out there? I think Sean Armstrong I signed, but Jacob Webb's still out there. There's a lot of guys that you can plug into the bullpen for around $5-6 million that will help this unit. And that's honestly, the more that I look at it, all they need, because you still have Dylan Ross, who's on the 40-man roster, and I'm very excited to see him compete for a spot in this bullpen. I think Huascar Braziban is a really fine multi-inning weapon. He got overused last year. Maybe you don't overuse him. Maybe he can still be effective for a much longer period of time, and you have the ability to option him. The Mets have signed 1 million relievers on minor league deals, and that's what David Stearns does. He's going to find some diamonds in the rough, and somebody who we're not thinking about, like Max Kranick last year, is going to step up in spring training, and is going to have, 7 or 8 appearances that are scoreless and strike out a ton of batters, and they're going to make the bullpen. And so I look at this bullpen right now with that back end of Devin Williams, Luke Weaver, A.J. Minter, and Brooks Raley. I think they're an arm away from being in a really good spot. I don't think the bullpen is in terrible shape. Which leads us to the starting rotation, who came into the offseason. And the big thing that everyone was worried about is, should the Mets get an ace? How are they going to get an ace? What are they going to do? We're going to talk about that in the final segment, but I want to leave you with this in this one. Last year, opening day rotation, Clay Holmes, David Peterson, Tyler McGill, Griffin Canning, and Cody Bellinger broke camp. Frankie Montas and Sean Manaea hit the IL. That rotation was the best in baseball until the middle of June. Now, they had Tyler McGill and Griffin Canning that were performing over their head. But Clay Holmes and David Peterson, what they did in the first half last year, I don't think it's crazy to think that they can do that again, or they can overall put together a similar season to what they just did. And if you got Clay Holmes and David Peterson, where Holmes is pitching to a mid-3s ERA and eating up 160 innings, and David Peterson is pitching to a low-4s ERA and eating up 160 innings, if it's not a whatever Peterson had, a 2.8 to then a 5, I don't even know the exact splits on Peterson, but if it was a more even balanced season, that's not bad for a fifth starter at making $7 million. You can expect a lot more from Sean Manaea next year. And you have Nolan McLean, who I think is legitimately going to be an ace. So right now, you got McLean, you got Holmes after proving he could start, David Peterson, Cody Bellinger, Sean Manaea with Brandon Sproat, Jonah Tong, and Christian Scott as depth. I don't think this rotation is in anywhere near as bad of shape as everyone thinks it is. What we're going to talk about in the final segment is still, what do they have to do to complete this roster, or at least get it in good enough shape where through the position battles and things that'll happen during spring training, you'll be pretty confident the Mets can go into opening day with a roster that you're going to like. So we're going to close the show there here in just a minute. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now it's time to take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club today and get Locked On Mets with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 a month or $50 a year. Go to lockedonmets.supercast.com or check the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, so let's talk about where this rotation's at again and what they could do this offseason. We've spent so much time on this show, and I'm sure all over the place, if you consume Mets content, other podcasts, if you watch SNY, there has been so much conversation and dialogue about this Mets rotation, so much focus on why that's what they had to do this offseason. But I'm looking at this roster right now, filling out this rotation and getting an ace, it's starting to fall further and further down my own personal pecking order of what has to happen, because I don't love the moves the Mets can make to address this rotation. In free agency, I liked Dylan Cease as a guy that could probably be better than he has been, who's going to give you innings and strikeouts, and I thought that that was a nice target. Signs a 7-year, $210 million deal, goes to the Blue Jays for a chance to win a ring. I'm not mad at the fact that the Mets missed out on it. It's a very significant investment. It's actually what I thought he was going to get. I did predict exactly that contract. I believe my prediction for just baseball was he was going to sign with the Giants or something. But regardless of that, I don't think that was a huge missed opportunity, right? You go through the other guys that have signed. Michael King, 3 years, $75 million, very player-friendly contract with opt-outs after each year. I liked Michael King. I would have been in on that, certainly. And honestly, maybe I would have given him that contract. I don't know. But there's a lot of risk in Michael King coming off the injuries that he's had. So we look at what's still out there, right? What other free agents could be signed? Well, also, I'll say, Merrill Kelly, right? Signs 2 for $40, kind of hefty, goes back to the Diamondbacks. The Mets were never going to get in on that. And I mean, I'm trying to think of the other guys that have signed, but there hasn't been many guys that have signed where it's like, I wish the Mets got that guy. King and Cease are the two that jump out to me. What's left on the market? Framber Valdez, Ranger Suarez, and you have Zach Gallen are the 3 big starters that are left in the market. All of them have qualifying offers attached. I like Framber, and I have pitched a contract idea on this show before that I'll reiterate now. I would give Framber Valdez the Alex Bregman contract. 3 years, $120 million, but I want you to pay attention to this part. For anyone that just kind of gasped at 3 years, $120 for Framber, the Alex Bregman contract had $60 million deferred, which brought the present-day value of the deal closer to $93 million. So really, this is more 3 years, 93, maybe you can call it 3 years, 95, whatever it is. You're talking about an AAV of around 31, 32 million, plus he got opt-outs after each year. Now, for me, on a contract like this, for Framber Valdez, I would not mind the opt-outs. For Michael King, I mind it a little bit more because you're assuming so much risk. With Framber Valdez, I don't think there's that much risk. The risk is signing Framber to a 5-year deal, or a 6-year deal, or a 7-year deal, whatever he's asking for. But if you get him on a 3-year, yeah, you give him opt-outs, but he's going to opt out because he had a great season, and then thank you very much for having a great season. I'm going to take that $30 million or the $40 million with $20 million of it deferred, and I'm going to throw it all at Tarik Skubal on a longer term, and I'm going to sign Skubal or Freddie Peralta next offseason. So if he opts out, to me, still a win-win for the Mets. Yes, you lost the draft picks. I get it. But you know what? If you're going to trade for Freddie Peralta, you're going to have to give up Brandon Sproat. And that's going to be the chances of the Mets hitting on that pick to the degree of getting another Brandon Sproat, you're fine giving up draft picks. I know typically you don't always want to do it, but if you're trying to find an ace who has the playoff pedigree of Framber Valdez, who is perfect for the team that you're constructing with Marcus Semien and Francisco Lindor, when now it's like you're supercharging this ace, you're supercharging this contract that you're giving out, because you have arguably the best ground ball starting pitcher in baseball in the last 5 years, and you're putting him, with an infield behind him that should be elite. I do really like the idea of signing Framber. Ranger Suarez, I'm not as sold on it. He's not the innings eater. He's not a frontline guy. I wouldn't be mad at it, depending on the price. But I don't look at Ranger and say he's an ace. I say, hey, Ranger can be an ace for a month. He could be an ace for half a season. But he's never put it together the whole year. He's the type of guy where it's 3 months of a 1.9 and 3 months of a 4.8 ERA. And it's going to come out to a low threes when it's all said and done. Good pitcher, but I don't know if I'm in on that. Zach Gallen, look under the hood, and that guy's got some concerning stuff with his data where it doesn't seem like it's as attainable for him to reach that frontline status again. Framber, the guy's going to get his ground balls. He's going to eat up innings. And I know all the stuff about the clubhouse and everything else. And, I put out a tweet today about this. I got a lot of comments of, you just changed the culture. It's all about the culture of the clubhouse. You're really going to bring Framber into it? Framber Valdez I kind of compare him a little bit to Pedro. Not nearly as talented, but mentality on the mound. Yes, he crossed up his catcher. It was a horrible look. I get it. But guess what? Because of that, he's not getting the 6-year contract offers he probably would get based on the back of his baseball card, where you can get this guy on a 3-year deal and you're not tied to him into his late 30s, where you're paying for the rest of his prime if he stays through the deal. And who knows? Maybe you don't even have to put the opt-outs in, but to me, I wouldn't mind it because, again, if he opts out, you reinvest in a better pitcher next offseason, where the class is a little bit better for free agent starting pitchers. So that's the one free agent that I like when it comes to the guys that still have the qualifying offers that you can talk yourself into them being a frontline arm. You talk about the trades, Freddie Peralta, Sandy Alcantara. We've gone through them all this offseason. Mackenzie Gore. How comfortable are you trading Brandon Sproat for any of those guys? And, of course, Tarik Skubal. Look, I'm not trading Jonah Tong for any of those guys, Skubal included, because I don't think you can extend him. I would trade Brandon Sproat for a year of Skubal. I wouldn't really think too much about it, but the Tigers aren't going to do that. I would trade Brandon Sproat for Freddie Peralta, but I want to extend Peralta if I'm going to do that. I want to go through some back channels and make sure that I can sign Freddie Peralta to an extension to give up 6 years to Brandon Sproat. Or I want to give up Brandon Sproat to get Peralta and Trevor McGill. So I get a back-end arm in the trade who have under control for 2 years. And I don't want to give up that much more on top of Sproat. I don't want to trade Brandon Sproat and Jet Williams for those guys. The more I think about it, no, I'm not giving up that much control when you see how valuable pitchers are. Shane Baz, while they didn't get back a top 100 prospect. They got back 2 recent first-round draft picks and a competitive balance pick for a guy that pitched to a 4.8 ERA because he throws hard and he has 3 years of control. Brandon Sproat throws hard and he has 6 years of control. I know Boz has done more in the big leagues, but Brandon Sproat could do that. So the more I think about trading these pitchers, the more I'm apprehensive to do it, and I can understand why the Mets haven't pulled the trigger on trading these guys. Now, I've talked about trading a lot to get Jarren Duran. To me, that's because Jarren Duran is the best outfielder to complete the Mets outfield for this upcoming season. Because Jarren Duran could be your starting center fielder that eases Carson Benge's transition into the big leagues, and you have him in left. And I think that is potentially the highest ceiling team the Mets could put together when you're talking about your starting lineup. So in that instance, when you get a guy with 3 years of control that has shown all-star potential, that's shown the ability in 2024 to actually be an elite defensive center fielder, I can talk myself into it. I can't talk myself into trading Brandon Sproat for Freddie Peralta the more I think about it, because unless I know Peralta's going to extend, it's a rental. And the value of Brandon Sproat and the ability to not only have him in your rotation, but to trade him at any point over the next 6 years, you're probably better served to hold on to that asset. So the more that you run through how the Mets could address their rotation, maybe you're better off signing Chris Bassitt or Jose Quintana to improve the floor of your rotation and just roll with what you got. Or maybe you're better off taking a flyer on Tyler Mahle, Walker Buehler, or John Gray looking for an upside play. And funny thing about all that, are any of those upside plays better than Kodai Senga? Are the Mets just so committed to turning a new leaf that they're going to trade Senga? Or do you just say, you know what, I know he's been frustrating the last 2 years, but that guy was leading a rotation that was the best in baseball for half a season. Maybe we just keep him and see what happens. Maybe we say, okay, either it's going to be Kodai Senga in our rotation or it's going to be Jonah Tong or Brandon Sproat. Maybe you go in and you say it's going to be Senga and Minaya or it's going to be Sproat and Tong. And when you have McLean, Peterson, and Holmes as the foundation of a starting rotation that I actually really like, you have 2 veterans that have a high ceiling in Minaya and Senga, and you have 3 young pitchers that can crack the rotation as well with Tong, Sproat, and Christian Scott. And you got a guy like Cooper Criswell for further depth. And again, you could probably find, with the way the free agent market is moving so slowly, you might be able to find a John Gray to be your Griffin Canning type. I think John Gray might get a little bit more than the $4.5 million or whatever it was the Mets signed Canning for, but you could probably find a guy like that. You could probably find somebody that has innings under their belt from last season even, that you can give a contract to compete in spring training. And so while I would still love the Mets a lot more if they just signed Framber, I love the Mets a lot more if they did pull off the Peralta trade and extended him. I can start to get my head around this rotation, even though that seems crazy with how the season ended. You have Nolan McLean for a full year. To me, that already is going to be a massive upgrade on what the Mets had last season going to spring training. And I'm confident in Holmes and David Peterson to be the 3 and the 4 in the rotation. And then I'm going to bet that one of Minaya or Senga might be able to be right atop that rotation with McLean. And if not, we're going to fill out the rotation with these other guys, the young players, and we're going to figure it out. I'm sure that's what David Stearns is thinking. I'm sure that's what he's telling the guys in his front office. I'm sure that's the conversation they're having. If they have faith in Jonah Tong and Brandon Sproat, and they certainly did in a playoff push last year, and you have enough confidence that after a healthy offseason for a lot of these guys and a good spring training, that you're going to get a lot more at the beginning of the season out of Peterson, out of Senga and Minaya, then you can start to say, you know what, this rotation is not that bad. And beyond that, you have Jack Wenninger, you have Jonathan Santucci, a couple more guys that could be big league ready this upcoming season. And you can always trade for a start at the deadline if you need one. This is not me saying the Mets are good in their rotation. This is me saying the cost of acquisition on the trade market is so astronomical, and there is not a clear-cut fit that you can trade for a starter that has control where it's worth it. I mean, look, to me still, like, the Pablo Lopez trade might be the best of both worlds, where you probably don't have to give up a Sproat to get that thing done, where you can trade from, maybe the headliner to a Pablo Lopez trade is Jonathan Santucci. I can get my head around that because Santucci is not going to be part of the Mets rotation next year. Personally, I don't even know if I would do that trade, honestly, because Pablo Lopez still has a pretty decently large contract. But my point is, when you look at what is on the market and what it seems like it would take to acquire pitchers via trade, it's tough to find a target. When you look at free agency and you're looking at Ranger, Suarez, you're looking at Zach Gallen, and then it falls off a cliff beyond those two in Framber, and you get to the Bassitt, Quintana, Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander segment, I don't know. Maybe the Mets are best off signing Chris Bassitt and just saying, all right, that's a guy that can give us 31 starts if we need him, but he also pitched great out of the bullpen in a playoff run for the Blue Jays, and so he has the ability to go do that. Maybe you convince Bassitt to come aboard because you don't have to give up any draft picks, and it's just another iron in the fire who has the high floor where he's going to give me innings and nothing else. And he's going to be a stabilizing force in that rotation, and he's a good guy in the clubhouse. Now, is Bassitt going to be really jumping at the bits to come back to the Mets when the few faces that he knew just got dealt? I don't know. But money talks, and if you want to throw $16 million at Chris Bassitt to get a deal done, and it's a very minimal risk transaction, and he's not blocking anybody, and you give him, obviously you'd have to have that conversation with him. You're not guaranteed 30 starts. You're, expected to be a big part of the rotation, but there's young kids who might push into the bullpen at some point, but we're going to try to win, and we got a lot of pieces that can win. Maybe that's the best way you go about it. But I do think that it's pretty funny how the offseason has gone, where what we were all looking at as the most important thing, and myself, first and foremost, go back in the archives and see how many shows I did talking about this Mets rotation. But that was before they took a wrecking ball to this core, and now you got to address that outfield. So if you're spending money anywhere, now I'm starting to think you spend money on Cody Bellinger. If you're trading that really big prospect package to get a player, you go get Jarren Duran. To me, those are the two players that have to be the top priority for the New York Mets right now, getting one of them. Because then your outfield's complete, and then you can go sign Austin Hayes if you want to, and I won't care because he's a bench bat who can play some outfield for you. Fine. I don't care if you don't trade for Yandy and you take a flyer on Mark Vientos again, because I'm perfectly comfortable if Mark Vientos gets runway to be your DH in April and May, because if it doesn't work again, I feel fairly confident that one of Ronnie Mauricio, Ryan Clifford, or Jet Williams will be ready for a bigger role, and you can shuffle your roster around, especially if you have Bellinger, where you can make everything fit and make sense. So that's where I'm at with this team right now. No longer thinking that they have to go out and they have to get an ace. They have to get an outfielder. And it'd be nice if they got another bullpen arm. It'd be nice if they added some depth to their rotation. But the only thing that they have to do above all else is get a guy that can legitimately be a starting outfielder and not a platoon situation at left. And they're just going to hope on a wing and a prayer that this whole lineup can somehow reproduce or replicate the production that they got last year when Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo, and Jeff McNeil were in the fold. Anyway, that's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. I appreciate all of you for tuning in. Like I said, I'm going to try to do one more show to close out the week here, hopefully reacting to some news. But I appreciate all of you who have been anxiously waiting for your next episode of Locked On Mets, and all of you who have been tuning in. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network.